70-742 Lesson 7, Creating and Managing GPOs, that's Group Policy Objects. So in this lesson, you'll be looking at an introduction to group policy, understanding group policy objects, viewing the group policy container, viewing group policy templates, configuring a central store. We'll be using the Group Policy Management console, and we'll be looking at creating and linking non-local GPOs, managing starter GPOs, configuring group policy settings. We'll be looking at creating multiple local GPOs and managing group policy objects when you would use a local GPO. Let's take a look and see what a group policy is. Group policy, as you can see, is a mechanism for controlling and deploying operating system settings to computers all over your network. We deploy the settings to the computers, and they apply either to the computer or to a user logging on to the computer. There's many user and computer settings for the various Microsoft Windows operating systems. Keep in mind that we're working with Windows Server 2016, therefore we have Windows 10 group policies available to us. Well, there's also group policies that may not apply to Windows 8. If a policy doesn't apply to a previous version of Windows, it simply gets ignored by that desktop operating system. We can configure one or more group policy objects, and then we use a process called linking to associate them with a specific Active Directory domain system object. Let's take a quick look at that. So here we can see is an entire list of group policies that have been created. Let's start off with firewall rules. These are firewall rules that were created, and they were designed to enable more seamless access. Now, you'll notice right here is links. How do you link that group policy to your Active Directory domain services? Well, what you do is you'll come up to the domain, or perhaps a organizational unit that you wish to link it to, and you right click and say link an existing GPO. Now you can right on the fly right click and say create a GPO in this domain and link it here, and it does that process all in one step. However, I would encourage you to create the group policy object first, verify that it has all the settings necessary. How do you do that? Because you want to make sure that it behaves the way you want it to. How do you do that? Well, we use a thing called group policy modeling. And with group policy modeling, you can test settings before they actually get deployed. So let's take a look again, perhaps the SNMP. This is to enable SNMP on the network so that it has the correct settings. We can see that it is linked to this branch policy test organizational unit, a spare computers organizational unit, and the domain itself. See the blue circle with the exclamation point? These are folders that have been created for testing purposes. If you right click on an organizational unit in group policy management, you can select block inheritance. That means that only the group policies that are contained and linked to that organizational unit will be applied to it. Otherwise, for example, branch listings. Branch listings is an organizational unit listed below our domain or in the hierarchical tree in our domain. All of these group policies that are linked to the domain root will be inherited by branch listings. So they will all apply to branch listings. If you wish to test something, you may say, I don't want all these other policies to be applied. So you block inheritance and then only link those group policies that you wish to test on that folder, say the security group that is in that organizational unit. Okay, that's kind of going a little bit beyond what we're talking about. But so let's jump back and let's take a look a little bit deeper in. So after you link a group policy to a container object, all the objects in that container receive the settings you configured in the GPO. So what does that mean? Okay, so here we can see that, for example, security groups. There are security groups. All of the group policies at the domain level will apply to that. What are in these? Let's take a quick look. Active Directory users and computers. If we expand the domain and we go down to that security groups and we select managers, we can see there is a security group for the manager's access. That is how those are applied. In the same way, remote users, users with laptops, and you can have specific policies applied at that level as well if you wish. Okay, so let's take a look here again. You can link multiple GPOs to a single Active Directory domain services container. We just saw that. All of those group policies are linked to the domain root. Or we could block inheritance and link only those policies that we want to test out. Or perhaps it's a organizational unit that has special settings. We're not using it for testing, we're using it in production. But we want to have different policies applied than the rest of the domain. This is how you do it. You can link multiple GPOs to a single container. Group policy objects contain the group policy settings to deploy to user and computer objects within a site, domain, or organizational unit. To deploy a GPO, you have to associate it with the container to which it's deployed. This links the GPO to that domain services object. So let's take a look at that. Coming back over here, you'll notice this particular one, Windows 10 settings for this particular user. And you'll notice that it's linked to the domain, but under security filtering, it's filtered to a specific person. So it will only apply to that person. Additionally, if you look at the bottom under WMI filtering, it only will apply to Windows 10 computers. All other computers will ignore it. If we select the Windows 10 settings, it applies to all computers in the domain. It applies to all authenticated users in the domain, but only applies to Windows 10 computers. And these are predefined, and for example, if you select that, you can select maybe it applies to all. For some reason you want to select that. By default it would, but maybe you need to select that. Hopefully there's no more XP computers. Hopefully you're phasing out all of those Windows 7 computers if you haven't already. Now let's say you want to apply the settings to specific locations. For example, you can see that Total Truck Parts organizes their hierarchy by location. Let's pick the WSUS Fort Lauderdale. Remember what WSUS stands for? Windows Server Update Services. So this is how updates are deployed to their workstations in their various locations. If we select the Fort Lauderdale WSUS GPO, we can see that it's applied at the domain level. However, it's filtered to only apply to those computers that are contained within the Fort Lauderdale computers security group. This is how you apply in a granular way. let's take a look at what we're talking about when we say that you can apply user or computer settings. So let's go down here, for example, install WebEx. It's applied at the domain, it's applied to all company computers. Now, this is a security group. If a computer is not a member of all company computer security group, it will not get the software. WebEx is a piece of software. Let's take a look at the settings. So here is the product. It's a software installation. It's an application to be installed. We provided a support URL, what the name of it is, the version that's going to be installed, where to find the MSI to install it from, and various other permissions. Let's look at the actual group policy. So if we look here, you can see it's a computer configuration. We're applying it to computers. Remember the security filtering? It was filtered by computers that are members of that group. So if we open up computer configuration, let's make it a little bit larger. We go into policies, and this is a software installation. And we can see that software installation right here and how it's created. So if you want to install software, this is done through a computer configuration. You can also make software available to users through a user configuration software settings installation. However, when you do it this way, you are going to create a package that will be published. It won't be automatically installed when a computer starts up. Let's take a look at that. If we look here, install applications, and we look at the settings, we'll notice that it's not defined under computer configuration. The software settings are published applications. Instead of being assigned to be installed, they are published. So for example, FileZilla FTP Explorer, Notepad++, these are applications that are available to be installed by users. How do they get to that? Well, let's take a look. If we go to Control Panel and we look under Programs and we say Programs and Features, and we can select Install a Program from the network. This was not available before. And now when they do this, those applications which are published for users become available for any user to install them. So use this with the understanding that any application that is published becomes available for all authenticated users. Do not publish applications which you do not wish to have available for the general public. Okay, let's get back to our main lecture. Okay, moving on. That's computer settings. What do computer settings do? Well, computer settings control the environment that you're in. What access do you have? What permissions do you have? What is available to you? User settings typically control experience. So let's take a look at one of those. Let's pick one here. Let's look at IE 8, 10, and 11 preferences. We'll learn about preferences in an upcoming lesson. But as you can see, yes, there is a computer configuration in there, which is preventing the first run wizard. And the choice is go directly to your home page. So this is controlling how Internet Explorer works the first time. The first time that you run Internet Explorer, it tries to give you information about how great Internet Explorer is. Or maybe it opens up a second tab and it takes you to the Internet home page that they want you to see. This prevents that first run wizard. So all computers would do that. All the rest of the settings are user configurations. Turn on automatic detection of intranet. Now, these are policies. The rest are user preferences. Where is the shortcut path? Setting targets, setting URLs, setting shortcuts to be automatically created for the users. Control panel settings for the users. What is the home page? When it starts up, start with the home page. These are all user settings that control the experience when the user utilizes Internet Explorer. That's the difference. Let's take a look at another one. If you'll remember back in 70-741 in year 1 lesson, we worked on DFS, Distributed File System. Well, here is a DFS shared directory. What we've done is we've configured a user configuration. The scope is all authenticated users at the root of the domain, and the settings are to create a drive T. Map a network drive T, and here's the location that it gets mapped to, a DFS root. It is automatically created for the user when they log on. So as you can see, user settings control experience. Computer configurations control permissions. Now, you say, well, wait a minute. Having access to a network drive, isn't that a permission? Well, yes, it is. The user has to have the permission first. This simply enables it to be seamlessly created in their File Explorer for them. Okay, continuing with our understanding of group policy objects. There's 3 types of group policy objects. All Windows operating systems have support for local GPOs, LGPOs. Now, since Server 2008 R2 and Windows Vista, we can support multiple local GPOs. Non-local GPOs are created in Active Directory, and that's what we were just looking at. They're linked to sites, domains, and organizational units. And as we just described, after being linked to a container, the settings in the GPO apply to all users and computers within that container by default. Now, the contents of each local GPO are stored in 2 different locations: the group policy container and the group policy template. That's in the sysvol. There's also a starter GPO. It's a GPO template, and it's used for creating domain-based GPOs based on standard settings. Now, the group policy container directory object includes subcontainers, and they hold the GPO information. Where do you find that? Well, you would go to Tools, Active Directory Administration Center, go into your tree view, and expand and look at the system node, and then select policies. So let's take a look at that. So here's Active Directory Administrative Center, and I'm running this on my jump box. I'm not running this on a server. And this little icon right here is tree view. By default, it's list view. So we select tree view, we expand the domain name, we come down to system, and we're going to expand system, and we're going to scroll down until we see policies. If you select policies, here are all those policy containers, each one of these. And the name, as you can see, is not very descriptive. If you view properties for one of these, this is what you see. This is all you see. Okay, moving back to our PowerPoint. If we want to view the templates, the group policy templates folder, it's located in the shared sysvol folder on a domain controller. So if we want to look at that, we need to do that on the domain controller, and it would be percent system root. Remember, this is a variable. What does that go to? That goes to C. If your default installation is in Windows, system root would be C:\Windows. And then sysvol, the name of the domain, and policies. This is the path to the default group policy template structure. A central store. Now, we have what's called a central store that's available to us. Up until 2008, all the files were ADMs, administrative template files. Now, we use XML-based file formats, ADMXs. And these administrative templates, they're the files that define the registry-based settings that appear in GPOs. You can create the central store to be able to place those in. What you do is you create a folder named Policy Definitions at the System Root Sysvol Domain Policies folder. This is where you place those ADMX files. Now, why would you want to do this? Doesn't that happen automatically? Anyway, let me get rid of Outlook running. That's becoming to be a little bit of a nuisance. Okay, that's gone. Okay, so here's the reason why, and I'm going to show you. Let me pause this for a second while I switch to that view. Okay, so what I've done is I've brought up our File Explorer on my jump box. And remember the way to view a hidden share with the $? And we talked about administrative shares, how the C drive is an administrative share, it's a hidden share. Well, this is how you access it. So for example, I typed in \\, the server name, \C $Windows, and it took me to the Windows directory. And we can see that here. Oops, sorry about that. Now, if I scroll down to sysvol and double click on it, I can see a domain. I'm going to double click on that. I'm going to double click on that policies. This is that same view we saw in the Administrative Center. But I'm going to scroll this to the very bottom. See policy definitions? Now, why is it important to have these? Let's double click and take a look. Now these are the language files. In the language files, there's a second. There's where this is an ADM file. This is a little different. It works in conjunction with the ADMX. Now, let's scroll down. Here are those ADMX files. And we can see all the various things. Add, remove programs, install ActiveX, package manager. These are all the special Active Directory templates that apply to your version of Windows. And you can see December of 2018. So these are a little over a year old. They apply for the current top level Windows 10 installation environment that this domain has. So it will have settings for that top level Windows version and everything below. But that's not all you can place in here. Let's keep going down. Look, Excel 15, Excel 16. Two different versions of Microsoft Excel and the ability to configure version-specific group policies. And we can do that. You'll see that here's Office. We had Excel. At the top of the list was Access. Here's Project. Here's Publisher. So it gives you the ability to create group policies that are specific to applications as well. Let's come back up here a little bit. Chrome. Google developed ADMXs for their Google Chrome so that Windows domains have the ability to control the experience of the Chrome browser. It's critically important that as an administrator, you control the experience of what your users are doing. You want to have a uniform home page. You want to control the way that things are performed, the way things are done. Without this, anything could happen with Google Chrome. Now in their environment, there's a controlled experience. Okay, let's get back out of the magnifier. Now, one thing I want to show you. You'll notice there's a 1709 folder. Those are older. These were the policy definitions previously. Once the new policy definitions were downloaded, before they were transferred into this structure, the policy definitions folder was renamed to 1709. We made sure that that change propagated out to all the other Active Directory, and this is where we placed the new policies. At one point, their highest Windows 10 version was 1709. Once they started getting versions of Windows 10 that was newer than that had been purchased since the beginning of 2018, these policy definitions were no longer effective, and the latest ones had to be retrieved. So, how do you get those? Well, you get them from Microsoft. Let's take a look. I'm going to do a quick search on the internet. We'll let their home page load, and you'll notice that I'm using Google Chrome, but it's going to load their intranet home page. We're going to search for Windows 10 policy definitions. And here's new policies for Windows 10. It's a document. And here's the download. Let's open that in a new tab. This is for the very latest of 1909. So were we to download these, then they would then have support for any new versions of Windows that were brought into the environment, or any older versions of Windows 10 that were upgraded to the latest environment. Now, typically you don't always do that, or you don't do that right away. Therefore, they're still working with an older version, because until they can do a uniform upgrade of all their Windows 10 systems, they don't want to have a mishmash of many different version levels. This is all part of controlling your security. But that's how you get the policy definitions. You download it. It will download to a folder on your computer. You extract the policy definitions. They still have not been placed in that policy definitions folder. They're in another place in your structure. Then, at your decision, you copy them into the policy definitions, and it will contain all those ADMX files as well as all the language ADML files. Hopefully that gives you a little bit better understanding of the central store. We use the Group Policy Management Console, and we've done this a few times, to control how those group policies are linked, manage their deployment, and we can edit each group policy as we create it or need to make future changes. Creating and linking non-local GPOs. This is the same thing we've been doing throughout this lesson, so I'm not going to go through this again. We've already covered this. If you're not working in a domain environment, but you still need to control the experience of the computers in that environment, you need to create local GPOs. They enable you just the same ways with our non-local domain-based GPOs. They allow you to configure and customize the experience of the user's desktop, the environment, and security settings. Here again, they're arranged the same way with computer configuration and user configuration. With working with those local GPOs, you can support 3 layers of group policies: the local group policy, an administrator and non-administrators group policy, and a user-specific group policy. Now, as I said, we can create and edit new GPOs, or we could edit existing GPOs. As a rule, regardless of whether you're editing or not, it's a good security practice to be backing up your GPOs. If you're going to make a major change to a group policy object, you would want to back up that group policy prior to making changes to it. In our lab, we'll walk through the steps on how we back up GPOs as well as restoring GPOs. Corruption does occur. If a group policy becomes corrupted, you can restore from a backup and be able to reinitialize the proper operation of that group policy. Depending on your environment, you may have junior administrators who you wish to have the rights to perform group policy management. We do this through delegation. You can delegate either at the domain level or at the organizational unit level, defining delegation of those persons who have the rights to manage group policies. Let's take a look at that. So if I'm back in group policy management, and if I want to have, let's look at the manager's organizational unit. Let's say we're going to delegate access to a user to give them the rights to create and manage organizational units. You select the organizational unit, you select the delegation tab, and then you pick the person who is allowed to do it. You select add, you put in the name, and you go. At that point, they'll have the rights to create new GPOs for that organizational unit and manage group policies for that organizational unit. And as I said, that can be done either at the organizational unit level or for the entire domain. Sometimes it's important to be able to verify that your infrastructure is working properly. Sometimes it takes a little bit more time than usual for your information to propagate or replicate to your domain controllers. Using the infrastructure status report, you can view that replication status between domain controllers. And if you navigate to the root of your domain, under status, you can see that right here. Now, for example, it shows that this is the baseline domain controller for this domain. There's no information status currently for this domain. We can click the Detect Now button at the lower right to gather infrastructure status from all the domain controllers in this domain. Okay, and so to wrap this up, understand that group policy, it's a mechanism for controlling and deploying operating system settings to computers, and those settings can consist of either user or computer settings for your Windows operating systems. There's many different ways to do it. We can configure them as local group policies, non-local group policies. We use the group policy management console, and then within that we have access to the group policy management editor. We can back up our group policies either all at one time or individually. We can restore group policies if we find that they're non-functional. We can also import. We can copy from a template. There's many different options when working with group policies. This has been 70-742, Lesson 7, Creating and Managing Group Policy Objects. Thank you.